Hi and welcome to Rad Class. Today I'm gonna talk about a big subject again. Today I'm gonna talk about world peace. And the way I'm gonna talk about it is I'm gonna look at the overall world, I'm gonna look at some countries, I'm gonna look a bit at religion, culture, ethnicity, world history, and it's gonna be a juicy one. So I'm not gonna try and offend anyone or anything else like that. I'm just gonna state some of the facts that I have found while doing some of the research for this, and some of the facts that I know from living in the world. So, the world is a big place, and we have a lot of different people in it, and that is something that can bring us all together and become better, but also divide us. And it has divided us for years and still does somewhere in the world. So I'm gonna talk about the big one first, and that being religion. Religion in itself is something that can bring joy and hopefulness to everyone. And a lot of countries actually have religion beliefs in their core system, core beliefs of how a country should be run. And if you use it right in a peaceful way, in a helpful way, then I don't have any problem with religion. I have a problem when you begin to take away personal freedoms and uh, look down at genders and talk about killing other people because of religion. But most religions actually have a peaceful message and a hopeful message, and has been guidelines on how to live your life in a time where you didn't really have those guidelines. But they can divide. There has been wars since the day of time where religion were one of the causes of fighting. Religion is often looked as the main cause of some of the fights, but to be honest, there is a lot of depth in that. And every conflict where religion has been in the conflict also have a lot of other problems before the religion part. Um, but I will try and look at that also. So religion has we have a lot of the same religion, so to speak. They have some of the same groundwork, and the most famous wars of the religion has been the Crusades. They are immortalized in movies about King Richard going down, trying to take back Jerusalem from the Muslims. And it's a horrible thing to imagine how many people have killed and have died because of religion. But religion can still cause major some major problems to this day. There are countries who divide themselves up because of religion. But then the next thing is, beside religion, we have ethnicity and race. And a lot of places are still dealing with civil war due to race or ethnicity. One of the more famous things we know about the Holocaust is the Jews, but there was also the Armenian genocide, where almost an entire ethnic group were removed from where they lived and killed because of their ethnicity. And that can still happen to this day. We still see some places where we thought this would never happen, and then it happens. One of the more famous ones we have right now is in China, where Uyghurs are being internment camped and taught how to be a real Chinese citizen because of their looks and ethnicity. And it's crazy to believe that this can still happen in the year 2021. We all thought that we have come to a place where we could live in a more melting pot of religion, culture, ethnicity. But sadly, that is not always the case. And ethnicity is crazy that you can be persecuted because of who your grandparents were and your parents were. But that is something that some countries view as hostile to the current government and they will try to eradicate that threat. Then the next thing we have to talk about is borders and resources. And there is, I'm kind of sorry, China, but I'm going to use you again. They have for years been in Tibet because there is a part of Tibet full of natural resources that they want. So they just took it and the world stood by and did nothing. Um, and it's crazy that they have such influence in the world that we almost never actually dare to do anything to stop them from doing what they're doing. But yeah, and resources can always become a major headache. Resources in the world are limited, and people will fight over them and have done so for generations. And it is something that is, again, horrifying that this can happen in this day and age, but it still does at times. Now, the next thing to talk about is when you want to live in a peaceful world, you have to have had peace for a certain amount of time. Because there's a lot of people who are looking at the continent of Africa and the Middle East and saying, why can't you just have peace? Why can't you just live in harmony together? But we have to remember that they live in it every day. And if you live in a place of fear where you fear that you can be killed one day or another, and it's horrifying when we see news reports of war zones where we see what they're going through, getting bombed, people dying all around. That leaves hate in the population that's gotten attacked. That leaves anger. And it takes a long time, it takes generations before that anger begins to simmer down and you can actually talk peace. But for that to happen, nothing aggressive have to happen in that country for years because otherwise you will still have that fear of war can come at any moment because they still hate us, or the fear of if we do this, they will retaliate and we will go to war. And it must be horrifying to live in a state of mind of like that. And it's easy for us who is living in a peaceful world to say, just have peace. That's it. And it's never that easy. And then the next thing is government leaders, because some leaders become dictators. Some leaders started a democracy and then they took away the democracy from the people, maybe without them realizing it, and became lifetime dictators. And as a dictator, you can mostly do as you want as long as you have the army on your side. And that can also bring war and civil unrest. And it can happen again this day. And it's something again about the state of mind of the people you're living with. If you live in fear every day, then you might end up rebelling against what fears you. I knew a guy who had to flee from his birth country because he wanted to vote for a Democrat during an election. And he spoke openly about this. And he had to flee to another country where I met him because of that. And he had to get his whole family with him because they were targeted as enemies of the state. And if you live in a place where you can be targeted as an enemy of the state just because you want to have a free vote, then the country might end up rebelling against the leaders and the military. And if that happens, there will become civil war. Maybe some neighbor countries will think, hey, this is our chance to take part of that country. And it will be like a whirlwind of death that will just affect not just the country it happens in, but all the countries around. And some of the countries who send volunteers, who send aid to that country. And that is like the global view of the globe. But if you dive down, you can see all this happen in history all around. You can see how a country would go to war with another country to gain resources, to gain something they needed to become a greater manufacturer of goods, or to give their people some luxury items. Or if they believed that this place that the other country now occupy used to be theirs in like 100 years ago, and they want to restore their borders. And it's what happened in Russia and Crimea, where they marched in there because they said it used to be Russian. We want to have it back. Most of the people here are Russian, and that is still going on today. It hasn't been solved, and that started uh, uh, like 6 years ago. And it's horrible to think that that can still happen this day. It was the excuse Hitler used during World War II to gain all the countries he gained. Austria, yeah, that used to be German speaking. It was part of Austrian Empire, and then he just kept going and going. And it is something that can happen to this day still, where people will look at the map and say, "This land used to be our land 100 years ago. We want it back." And it is something that we can never predict when will happen, because a lot of the maps we have today are still being changed slowly by some countries trading with other countries, or some countries dividing up, or a civil war will happen and the country will be divided. And the most known divided country we have right now is Korea, that became divided after World War II. And they are a prime example of how hard it can be to get peace. It is so many years since the conflict started, and they are still at war with each other. It started in 1950 and lasted 3 years to 1953, and they never signed a peace, they just signed a truce. So they could actually break out war at any time. That is why it's such a scary place. South Korea has done a lot of stuff, North Korea not that much, but it's a prime example of how a leader and a belief in different things can actually divide a country. Because after World War One, the Soviet Union, who were communists, took the northern part of Korea, and the Allied, who was a democracy, took the southern part. And then at one point, it just blew over, and they began to declare war at each other. North Korea invaded South Korea, and within days, the Allies intervened because they saw the communist push down through Korea, and they were afraid that it would spread to the rest of Asia. And that is just the belief of two different things: communism or and dictatorship, or democracy and capitalism. And that belief can be enough for the world to enter a fight for life and death. And it is insane for most people to think that this is still going on. They still have a truce. We look at North Korea today and laugh a bit of them, but we have to remember, for them it's deadly serious. They have a dictator, a man who are ordained by God, according to them, and who will help them crush their enemies. And when you have people like that, if you go in, you can go around the map doing this. India and Pakistan are still having a conflict. There's countries in Africa still having conflicts. In the Middle East is brewing with conflicts, especially after ISIS began to roam down there. And it's a beehive, and land you can't just land an army in that beehive and smash it up and then think, okay, we got this now, it's fixed. because even though you remove the queen bee, then the rest of the bee will just find a new queen, and they might not find the same one. Some would want to go back to the old one, some want to go with the new one, and then a civil war would start. And it's something that we can see in Afghanistan, where we invaded them and we took out their leaders, but they're still fighting. To this day, they're still fighting. Some want to go back to the old ways, some want to go with the new ways, some just want to be left alone. And that can happen again all over the world. And when we try to fix it, when we go like, okay, we're gonna help this, we're gonna do this, it often makes it everything worse because we are doing it with the best in mind. We are doing this to try and give the people a way to vote, a way to live without fear and reprisal. But it is something that takes decades for a country to come over uh, a change like from a dictator to democracy. It takes time to learn to live with new rules, new ideas, a new culture, a new way of looking at things. It takes a long time, but it's a very costly affair. So that is why most countries are like, okay, we fought the war, the enemy leader is dead, now we will pull out. But if you do that, then the strongest faction will just take over the power, and then you can start over. And it's a long and costly process, and it's not a process that worth doing just by doing. It has to be given a good cause in the first place, and the country really need to have said help us before we begin to do anything. And then the second thing is, if we choose to go into a country, we might see some other countries who are backing the current state actually helping that state. And that can lead to proxy wars and it can lead to conflict between nations again. And it can all flare up into major wars. So, world peace is an ideal that we can always try and achieve, but it's not something that can be done that easy. We have to look at every country, every culture, every religion, every ethnicity, and make sure that in some way or form that we can all live together in a big pot where we can melt together and become better human beings, where we can all be without fear. And then we have to try and let it start somewhere and spread. And when it spreads around and people take it with them home, and future generations might see this and not have been in war for like a generation, then they might begin to think, okay, we need to have peace now. We want to have peace now. We are used to having peace. Let's bygones be bygones. Let the past be past. Let's look forward to a new time, a bright time. But it's hard to do that if you live in a place where the bright future is a future without your neighbor. And that is something that can only change over a long, long time, where everything has been peaceful and good, not only for the people, but also for the leaders. And that is something that is almost unachievable. But I believe that at some point we will reach that point where we all live in a place when you don't have to fear a war would break out at any moment. And it's kind of crazy that the things that almost always brings everyone together is a war against an enemy. Um, you can just see how every country worked together during World War II to go against the Germans, and that is insane that sometimes you need a war to bring people together, but you can also bring people together to avoid war. And that is the thing we should strive after, to get into a